I'm reading from chapter 17 of Revelation. And one of the 7 angels with the 7 bowls approached me and addressed me with these words, "Come to my side. I will show you the judgment of condemnation visited upon the great whore. She has her place of residence near an abundance of waters. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and men all over the world have made themselves drunk with the wine that accompanies her fornication." At that, the angel lifted me up under the impulse of the Spirit and carried me off into the wilderness. And this is what I saw there. There was a woman mounted on a beast, which was colored scarlet. The beast was covered all over with names giving expression to blasphemy, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. As for the woman, she was clothed in purple and scarlet. She was adorned with gold, with precious stones, and with pearls, and in her hand she held a golden cup, which was filled to the brim with her fornications, with the foul practices attending her in her abominations. Moreover, she had a cryptic title inscribed upon her forehead: Babylon the Great One, the mother of whores and of the abominable things of the world. And there was this: I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of those consecrated to God, with the blood of those who had borne testimony on behalf of Jesus. And I was struck with amazement when I saw this. In this video, we're going to explore the meaning behind the woman's clothing and the cup she bears and her calling. And when I say calling, I'm using the term in a perverse way. I'm referring to the inscription on her forehead. We'll get to that. This woman is described as wearing costly garments made of cloth that's purple and scarlet, purple and red. And the reason that this is costly is because those dyes used to make such garments in those times were very costly, so only the very wealthiest people could wear them. These were symbols of high status, very high status, in the eyes of the world. But in the cosmic scheme of things, they are, to use a phrase that Paul used elsewhere in a different context, filthy rags. Because the garments, the clothing of this woman bears comparison to the garments of the celestial woman. In chapter 12 of Revelation, what is purple and scarlet cloth compared to being clothed with the sun? And what is sitting on some marvelous beast compared to having the moon under your feet? So when contrasted to the celestial woman, this expensive cloth represents not prestige, but poverty. And another comparison that ought to be made is between the garments of the woman of chapter 17 and the garments of the bride of Christ in chapter 19. The garments of the bride of Christ are linen, pure linen, immaculate linen. And it represents the righteousness of those who rise to the new heaven, to the new Jerusalem, to be with Christ, to be with God for all eternity. And compared to that pure linen, this red garment, this purple cloth, represents a poverty not just in a material sense, but in a moral sense. Rather than representing loftiness, when compared to the garment of the bride of Christ, it represents shame. Now let's talk about the woman's cup, the goblet that is filled to the brim with her fornications and with the vile practices that go with her abominations. To think of that cup, it's hard not to think about what is said a few sentences later in Revelation, that she is drunk with the blood of those who are consecrated to God and those who bear witness to Jesus Christ. Now, this is shocking enough, the idea of consuming the blood of those who are consecrated to God, those who bear witness to Jesus Christ. But it is even more shocking to first century sensibilities, and that might be surprising, but it is. And to understand why it is, we have to look at the book of Acts. Because in the book of Acts, around, I want to say chapter 12, but don't hold me to that. In the book of Acts, Paul and Barnabas are spreading the gospel in a particular city. And some people from Jerusalem come down to where Paul and Barnabas are teaching. And they tell people that unless they are circumcised under the law of Moses, they cannot belong to this fledgling church. And Paul and Barnabas contest this, and there's some heated discussion. And so the people who are the subject both of the teaching of Paul and Barnabas and the teaching of these people who are coming down from Jerusalem decide that they will request a delegation to go to Jerusalem and lay this issue before the leaders of the church so they can get an authoritative pronouncement. And that's what happens. Paul, Barnabas, and some others go to Jerusalem and they lay the issue before the church. And Peter prayerfully responds as such. He says, to those who are not part of the Jewish community who are joining the church, we are not going to trouble you to participate in all of the laws of Moses, but we will ask 4 things. Refrain from fornication. Refrain from eating food sacrificed to idols. Do not eat anything strangled, and do not eat the blood. Now, the rule against eating the blood, actually precedes in Scripture the law of Moses. To find that first enunciated, first articulated, you have to go all the way back to Genesis and the narrative of Noah. And after, let me back up. God gave permission to the people of the earth to eat any fruit, any vegetable, any nut, or anything else. But until the story of Noah, there's no permission to eat any of the living creatures. After Noah and his family disembark, then they are given permission to eat of the creatures, but they are forbidden at that time to eat the blood. And as pertains to our discussion here, they're also forbidden to eat the flesh of human beings. And they are told that any creature or any person that takes the life of a human being will be held accountable for that life. These days, among people who eat meat, there seems to be, at least in this country, so far as I can tell, and so far as I can remember from the days when I eat meat, no prohibition about consuming the blood in the meat. And you'd have to ask some church historian when that particular rule went by the wayside and why. But I can understand, I think you can see why Peter put that in to the few rules that the church was going to request the new believers who were coming from outside the Jewish tradition to adhere to. In Peter's view, based upon Scripture, this preceded the law of Moses, which means that it went back to our common ancestor Noah, which meant that it wasn't a rule of a sect or a particular group, but that it was a universal rule. So it was not only something that would, as it were, grease the wheels for cooperation among the Jewish members of the fledgling church and the non-Jewish members, but it would also, since it's universal, keep the new believers from coming into conflict as they presumably went on their missionary journeys to spread the good news. It would keep them from coming into conflict with other people. So you can see the enormous implications of the fact that this woman is drunk on the blood of those who are consecrated to God and who bear witness to Jesus Christ. She is not only drunk, which is a disreputable thing, but she is drunk on blood, and not only blood, but drunk on human blood and drunk on the blood of believers, those who are consecrated to God, those who bear witness to Jesus Christ. And of course, to circle back, she's not just sipping this blood. It's not an occasional thing. She is drunk on that blood. So we're already beginning to see a foreshadowing based upon what we know about God's attitude toward the taking of life and the taking of human life, what the fate of this woman will be. But before we talk about that, let's talk about what it says, what is etched into her forehead. And this will be an archway into our final discussion in this video about who this woman is. Remember what it says. It says, Babylon the Great One, the mother of whores and of the abominable things of the world. Not something I'd write in somebody's yearbook. But we're trying to figure out who this woman is, so it behooves us to look ahead a little bit in chapter 17 and see what the angel says when he starts explaining to John what this vision that John has seen means. He speaks mostly about the beast that the woman is seated upon, but he says some very important things about the woman. He says that she is seated on 7 hills. He says, the waters which you saw in the place where the whore has her place of residence represents peoples, populations, nations, and tongues. And, very important, moreover, the woman whom you saw is the great city which exercises kingly rule over the kings of the earth. Now, it goes into chapter 18. 18 is where the destruction of this woman is described, and the reaction of people is described. And there's a mixed reaction. It says that many people are grieved by her destruction because they engaged in commerce with her. So the traders are sorrowful, and other nations who participated in her fornications grieve. And the traders grieve because, as it says at verse 11 and 18, the traders of the earth will be weeping and mourning over her because there is no longer anyone ready to buy their cargo of gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls, of fine linen, purple cloth, silks, scarlet cloth, all kinds of scented woods, and articles made of ivory, of articles made of wood, of great worth, bronze, iron, or marble, cinnamon and spice, incense, perfume and frankincense, wine, oil, fine flour and wheat, stocks of cattle, sheep, horses, chariots, and slaves. Human cargo. This is a detailed list of the goods necessary to keep a great city of the first century thriving, including a detailed list of luxury goods. So, of course, the woman is Rome. Rome is built on 7 hills. It was the center of commerce. It was a mighty power. It was a place that people flocked to trade in and to settle in. In Rome, there were temples of religions from all over the world. It was greedy, it was cruel, and it drank the blood of the saints. But it's not just Rome. I agree with George Alan Ladd in his commentary on Revelation. I agree that here, the great city, the whore of Babylon, represents any empire that resembles Rome, any empire that becomes a center of commerce and a hegemonic power, and that people flock to or want to flock to. The capital of any nation that is cruel, the capital of any nation that wants what other people have and breaks down any barrier to get it. It is any disproportionately powerful nation that is out of sync with God. And here I want to go back to what was etched on the woman's forehead. And I want to talk about the fact that it was etched on her forehead. In another tape, we talked about things being etched on the hand where the person himself or herself can see it, versus being etched on the forehead, where in a time without mirrors, the person couldn't read what was written. And so, the point I'm making is that nations that fit the description of Babylon might not necessarily recognize themselves as such. We as human beings, and I think we as nations, sometimes have a blind spot to our own faults. It's easier for somebody to spot my faults and my sins than it is for me to recognize them myself. And the same is true of nations. And we have seen how in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Kings and Chronicles. No, I was right the first time. Samuel. No, I was right the second time. I'm getting tired. Kings and Chronicles. Solomon started out virtuous and humble, but as time went by, the emoluments of office got to his head, and he ended up betraying God by putting up, for the sake of his wives, altars and monuments to foreign and false gods. The same can happen to a country no matter how idealistically it may start at any time. When the power gets to its head, it can turn away from God for the sake of loving wealth, loving power. It is so very tempting when a nation is above all others by head and shoulders, like Saul was head and shoulders above all other men of his time, to think that such a nation cannot be moved, such a nation is impregnable, and that it can thrive and dominate by military might alone. And yet, there is a thread going through all of the Hebrew prophets and in Revelation that tells us otherwise, that however powerful a country might be, God makes its power seem like smoke, no matter how skillful its warriors are. God can make the stoutest and most cunning soldier cry out like a woman in labor. And no matter how advanced its technology is, God can pull a single thread that makes its entire enterprise unravel in a moment. There was a time, there were several years during the middle of the 20th century when people thought that Hitler and his armies could never be overturned. So people who were occupied by the Nazi regime didn't try to resist. And then they found out that he was weak, he was vulnerable, he could be defeated, and his so-called 1,000-year Reich ended 988 years before he predicted. And that should give any nation pause if it thinks that by might alone, by power alone, by cleverness alone, it can thrive forever. Jeremiah said that the wise man should not trust in his wisdom, the strong man should not trust in his strength, the wealthy man should not trust in his wealth. But those who boast should boast in the Lord, that they know that he is, that they know that he is God, that they know that he acts in the world with steadfast love, righteousness, and justice, because he delights in these things. No country, if it is wise, abandons a rule-based system of international order because it happens to be the biggest and baddest bully on the block. Because the biggest and baddest street fighter can be taken down by a lucky punch or a sucker punch. And certainly, the meanest man in the valley can be taken down by God. A rules-based international order where fairness and justice prevail is pleasing to God, and it protects not only the weak, as some people are inclined to think, but it protects the strong too. And anyone who thinks other than that simply does not know God. And that's the discussion of the woman from chapter 17 and chapter 18 of Revelation. Hopefully next time we'll talk about the beast upon which she is mounted.